A new video from Prichard Colón's funeral is going viral, just days after the former boxer died at 33. It shows his family saying their final goodbye after 11 years of fighting by his side. But one heartbreaking moment in the footage is getting everyone's attention. Let me break it down. Prichard Colón, dead at 33. The boxing world found out through a Facebook post from his father, Prichard Colón, on a Thursday. His father, Prichard Colon, announced his son's passing late on Thursday on Facebook. "I regret to inform you of the passing of my son Prichard from this earthly world." The post continued with the line that's now been repeated across every outlet covering the story, that Prichard was in a better place now. The footage people are sharing didn't come out of nowhere. In the middle of the morning, a video began to go viral of what appeared to have been part of his final moments in this world. That's what kicked off this wave. Clips from the service, tributes, and older recovery videos all resurfacing at once, blending together into one emotional timeline that fans are now piecing apart moment by moment. Before the funeral, before the viral clips, there was a fighter. His professional career, beginning in 2013, was similarly successful. The super welterweight competed in a total of 17 matches. He won 16 of those, and 13 were by a knockout. He wasn't a footnote. He was, by every account from people who covered him at the time, a rising name in a sport that runs on rising names. Then came the fight with Terrell Williams. The super welterweight bout in October 2015 was awarded to Williams in the 9th round on disqualification, after Colon's team removed his gloves, with the fighter complaining of dizziness. That single sentence contains almost the entire tragedy: a fighter in visible distress, a corner that misread the rules, and a disqualification that sent him out of the ring instead of to a hospital immediately. What happened next is the part that turned Prichard Colón into more than a boxing story. Colon collapsed on return to his dressing room and was diagnosed with a subdural hematoma, and he underwent emergency brain surgery. Colon collapsed on return to his dressing room and was diagnosed with a subdural hematoma, and he underwent emergency brain surgery, after which he was comatose. A subdural hematoma means bleeding between the skull and the brain. Left unchecked, that kind of bleed kills people. Colón didn't die that night. He went under the knife instead, and then he went silent for the better part of a year. Colon had required full-time care since suffering a severe brain injury during his fight against Terrell Williams on October 17, 2015, in Fairfax, Virginia. 221 days in a coma. That's not a phrase. That's over 7 months of a young man's body lying in a bed. While his family waited, prayed, and posted updates to Facebook, hoping strangers on the internet would somehow help bring him back. Prichard is breathing without machines. The glory of God. "I just need you to wake up," Colon's family posted on the fighter's Facebook page, when the 23-year-old Colon, who had suffered bleeding on the brain, underwent emergency surgery to relieve pressure inside his skull. That was the tone of those early months. Desperate hope, framed in religious language, because there wasn't much else to hold on to. He did eventually wake up, but waking up wasn't the ending anyone wanted. The injuries were life-changing, and Colon, who remained in a persistent vegetative state, required round-the-clock medical assistance ever since. He could not speak in the way he used to. He could not walk. For 11 years, his life was measured in physical therapy sessions, wheelchair transfers, and a family that never stopped showing up. That's the setup behind the footage now circulating. It's not just a funeral video. It's the final chapter of a story that fans have followed in fragments since 2015. Through TikToks of birthdays, through hospital transfers, through lawsuits, and now through burial. Every piece of that timeline explains why this clip hit so hard when it surfaced. To understand the full weight of it, we need to break down what actually happened in that ring, what his life looked like in the years after, what his family fought for in court, and what the boxing world is saying now that he's gone. To really understand why the funeral footage carries the weight it does, you have to sit inside that ring in Fairfax, Virginia, for a few more minutes. This wasn't a freak accident in the first round. It built for 9 rounds in front of an NBC broadcast, with a referee who had chances to stop it and didn't. Colón walked into that fight a rising star. He emerged as a promising young talent, smashing a run of national amateur championships to win 5 titles and earning a Youth Pan American gold medal, all before turning 20. He wasn't some club-level fighter who got unlucky. He was a decorated amateur who turned pro and kept winning. As a junior middleweight, Colon thrived, recording a 16-0 record with 13 knockouts, as he appeared on his way to stardom, but a tragic injury in 2015 changed the course of his career. 16 fights, 16 wins, 13 by knockout, no losses, no draws. Just a clean, undefeated resume heading into a fight against Terrell Williams. That was supposed to be another step up the ladder. Williams wasn't a nobody either. Williams, who himself was a star of the sport at the time with a 15-0 fight card and 12 by knockout, fought again in 2017 and 2019, but said the events following the meeting with Colon affected his life and career. Two undefeated fighters. One night, and only one of them walked away with his career intact. The fight itself has been picked apart by boxing analysts, journalists, and fans for over a decade now. And the details get worse the closer you look. By the middle rounds, something was clearly wrong. By the 7th round, Colon went down after another illegal shot and instinctively clutched the back of his head, a visible sign that something was wrong. That's the moment a lot of people point to when they ask why the fight wasn't stopped right there. It wasn't stopped. The fight kept going, and the punches to the back of Colon's head, the illegal shots known in boxing as rabbit punches, kept coming. Cooper warned Terrell Williams at least once, according to later legal filings, but the fight continued. A warning. Not a disqualification for Williams, not a stoppage, not a doctor rushing into the ring. A warning, and the bout rolled on. By the 9th round, Colon was in visibly worse shape. Williams knocked Colon down twice during the 9th round, and the Puerto Rican fighter appeared disoriented and unable to defend himself. 2 knockdowns in a single round from a fighter who had never been knocked down in his career. That's not a bad round. That's a body failing in real time in front of a national television audience. Then came the moment that's replayed constantly in the retrospectives, the mix-up that turned a medical emergency into a technicality. When the round ended, Colon's corner mistakenly believed the fight could not continue and began removing his gloves. Under boxing rules, a fighter cannot re-enter the ring without gloves, and because the team could not replace them in time, Colon was disqualified. His own corner, trying to protect him, may have made things worse by taking him out of the fight through a technical disqualification, instead of the ringside doctor calling a halt for medical reasons. What happened in the minutes after the bell is the part that turns this from a bad loss into a life-altering tragedy. He left the ring with assistance, vomited in the dressing room, and collapsed, the moment doctors later identified as the onset of his brain bleed. Vomiting and collapse are textbook signs of a brain bleed. By the time anyone reacted, the damage was already spreading. The 23-year-old Colon suffered bleeding on the brain and underwent emergency surgery to relieve pressure inside his skull. Shortly after a 9th-round disqualification loss to Terrell Williams of Los Angeles on an NBC televised Premier Boxing Champions card at Eagle Bank Arena in Fairfax, Virginia, emergency brain surgery on national television's undercard fighter, hours after millions had just watched him boxing on their screens. Doctors gave the family early signs of hope. He no longer needs a ventilator, and the doctors have removed the pressure monitors on the brain, which is a very good sign. Promoter Lou DiBella, who put on the card on behalf of the PBC, told ESPN.com on Monday that cautious optimism was the emotional rhythm of the entire ordeal. Small updates, prayed over Facebook posts, and a family clinging to every scrap of good news. The fans who've re-watched that fight footage over the years, especially the versions that keep resurfacing on social platforms, tend to land on the same reaction. One commenter wrote that the fighter should be in prison for those hits, calling it a fighter unable to control his emotion in the ring, and 100% intentional, adding that he ruined this young man's life. Another commenter placed blame elsewhere entirely, arguing the official deserved more responsibility for not stopping the fight earlier. Years later, those same arguments are resurfacing in the comment sections under the funeral clips, as if the debate over blame never actually ended. It just went quiet for a while. That's the inciting incident. One night, 9 rounds. A series of illegal punches nobody stopped in time, and a young man's entire life rerouted in the space of about 90 seconds after the final bell. Everything that followed, the 11 years of care, the lawsuit, The funeral footage now circulating traces back to that dressing room collapse. If the fight was the inciting incident, the decade that followed is the part of the story most people never actually saw in real time. And it's exactly what makes the funeral footage land so differently for longtime followers versus casual viewers. Colón didn't die in that hospital in Virginia. Colón was treated for several weeks at Inova Fairfax Hospital in Virginia, but was eventually transferred to Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Shepherd Center specializes in catastrophic brain and spinal injuries, and that transfer alone tells you how serious his medical team considered his condition to be. This wasn't a short recovery track. It was long-term rehabilitation from the start. Colón was moved from the hospital to his mother's home in Orlando, Florida. That's where the next chapter of his life played out, largely outside of national headlines, inside a family home converted into round-the-clock care. He was then in a persistent vegetative state and unable to speak, but was eventually released from the hospital, receiving physiotherapy and using a computer for speech until his death. A computer for speech. That detail alone reframes everything. Colón wasn't simply recovering in the way media shorthand often implied. He was living with permanent, severe impairment, communicating in whatever limited way technology allowed for over a decade. That reality didn't stop his family from documenting moments of joy wherever they could find them. Colón was celebrated for his spirit after his injury, with his family uploading videos to TikTok about his recovery, including him smiling as he's presented with a cupcake on his 31st birthday, going to physical therapy, and dancing with his mom. Those clips are part of why so many people feel like they knew him personally, even though they'd never followed boxing closely before. Those TikToks built an entirely separate audience from his boxing fan base, people who never watched the Williams fight, but who followed Prichard through birthdays, small physical milestones, and family moments. That audience is a huge part of why footage from his funeral spread as fast as it did. For millions of followers, this wasn't a boxer they vaguely remembered. It was someone whose recovery journey they'd been watching unfold in real time on their phones for years. His father became something else entirely during this stretch. Not just a parent, but a full-time caregiver, and, at times, an outspoken advocate demanding accountability. Prichard Colon traveled to see Terrell Williams' next fight roughly 2 years later, staging a protest at the weigh-in. And as an announcer introduced Williams, he yelled from the audience, calling out that this was the man who put his son in a coma. Security ushered him out immediately after the outburst. That moment captures the raw, unresolved anger that simmered under the surface of a decade, defined publicly by prayer requests and privately by grief. Of a decade defined publicly by prayer requests and privately by grief. Colon told ESPN's Outside the Lines he believes Williams should not be given the opportunity to return to boxing. After his October 17, 2015 fight left previously unbeaten Prichard, Colon brain-damaged and unable to walk or talk. That's a father speaking, not as a bystander, but as someone who watched his son go from an undefeated prospect to a person who could no longer perform basic physical functions independently. The years brought incremental change, but never the recovery the family hoped for. Fans tracking his condition through unofficial updates over the years describe him as making small gains in physical therapy, but nothing close to regaining independent speech or movement. The persistent vegetative state diagnosis, confirmed early on, essentially defined the rest of his life. He required constant supervision, could not manage his own care, and depended entirely on his parents, separated between Florida and at times connections back to Puerto Rico, to keep him alive and as comfortable as possible. That's the backdrop that makes his father's final Facebook message so heavy. Colón's father, Prichard Colón, announced his son's death Thursday, saying the family had tried to fulfill his son's wish of returning to Puerto Rico for a vacation. 11 years of caregiving, and the one wish the family couldn't grant before the end was a trip back to the island, where Prichard had once represented his country as an amateur champion. His father wrote that he had done everything he could to fulfill his son's wish, his dream of bringing him on vacation to Puerto Rico, as he so longed to do, but thanking people for so many years of love and prayers and asking them to keep the family in their prayers as much as they could. That single unfulfilled wish has become one of the most repeated details in every tribute posted since his death. A small human detail buried inside a decade of medical trauma. No official cause of death has been released publicly. Colon's official cause of death has not been made public. Multiple outlets have echoed that same detail, noting the family chose not to share specifics, which is consistent with how private they largely kept his day-to-day condition over the years, even while sharing selective, hopeful glimpses online. This decade of quiet, grinding caregiving is the piece of the story that gives the funeral its full emotional charge. It's not just the end of a boxing tragedy, it's the end of an 11-year vigil that a family conducted mostly outside the spotlight, occasionally surfacing in a hospital hallway video or protest outburst, but mostly happening behind closed doors in a home in Florida. While the Colon family managed Prichard's day-to-day survival, a separate battle was unfolding in the courts, one aimed at making someone answer for the medical failures that let that fight go on as long as it did. In 2017, Prichard Colon's parents, Richard and Neves, along with Sean Bogle, filed a civil lawsuit related to the boxer's devastating 2015 injury. 2 years after the fight, with Prichard's condition by then understood to be permanent, the family moved from grief into legal action. The lawsuit didn't target Terrell Williams. Federal court records show that ringside physician Dr. Richard Ashby, Family Practices Medical Services, PC, Headbangers Promotions, Inc. and DeBella Entertainment, Inc. were named as defendants. And notably, Terrell Williams and referee Joe Cooper were not named in the lawsuit. That distinction matters. The family's legal fight wasn't about punishing the man who threw the punches. It was about the medical and promotional infrastructure that let those punches keep landing. The core argument centered on the ringside doctor's judgment calls during the fight itself. The complaint alleged medical malpractice by Dr. Richard Ashby for failing to act when Colon indicated several times that the back of his head hurt, and for not stopping the fight in the 7th round, when Colon reportedly told Ashby he was dizzy and had pain in the back of his head, after a Terrell Williams rabbit punch sent him to the canvas. That's the 7th round complaint again, the same moment the fight should have ended, according to the family's legal team, 2 full rounds before the knockdowns that actually ended it. The family's attorney was blunt about what should have happened. When you hear dizziness and pain in the back of the head after trauma, you send the patient to the hospital. Ari Casper, the Collins attorney, told Outside the Lines, adding that there's a heightened cause for alarm because you know he's going to be hit in the head for the remainder of the fight. That's the entire malpractice claim in one sentence. The warning signs were there, spoken out loud, and the fight continued anyway. The lawsuit also went after the promotional side of the card. The complaint accused the medical team of negligence in responding to Colon's condition and questioned the promoter's responsibilities surrounding the fight. The suit further asserted that co-promoters Headbangers Boxing and DeBella Entertainment were negligent because they did not provide a physician with necessary qualifications, experience, and competence. In other words, the family argued the entire safety net around the fight, from the doctor at ringside to the organizations who hired him, had failed at every level. The number attached to that lawsuit became one of the most repeated figures in coverage of the case. The lawsuit sought more than $50 million in damages, with the family saying the money was intended to help cover the extensive care and support Colon needed following the life-altering injury. That wasn't a punitive number pulled from nowhere. It reflected the reality of what round-the-clock medical care costs, over what could be an entire remaining lifetime. For a man who was only 23 years old at the time, Casper laid that out plainly, describing the astronomical cost of caring for a patient in Prichard's condition, who required constant supervision and whose suffering, in his words, was unimaginable. That legal fight became one piece of a larger reckoning. The sport went through because of what happened to Colon. Boxing organizations didn't just watch from the sidelines. His case pushed at least one governing body to change its own rules. In 2016, the WBC introduced the Prichard Colon rule to discourage and punish blows to the back of the neck, called rabbit punches. A rule now carries his name, permanently written into the sport's regulatory history because of that one night in Fairfax. The World Boxing Council went further than just naming a rule after him. The organization tried, in its own way, to give him something to hold on to during those years of limbo. Reporting around his death noted that the WBC had previously named Colon an honorary world champion, presenting him with its recognizable green and gold championship belt, a gesture the organization framed as something he had always deserved, regardless of how his career ended. The same statements from the WBC pointed to broader safety reforms the organization says his case pushed them toward, including stricter medical protocols at fights going forward. None of that legal or regulatory movement brought Prichard back to who he was before October 2015. The lawsuit sought to cover the cost of survival, not to reverse the injury itself, and the rule changes came too late to change what had already happened to him. But together they form the third theme of this story. After the injury itself, and after the decade of caregiving, there was a fight for accountability that stretched through courtrooms and boxing federations, trying to answer for what happened in that ring. Even as the man at the center of it all lived out his life, largely unable to speak for himself. That accountability fight, the TikTok updates, the 11 years of caregiving, all of it converged the moment Prichard Colón posted that his son had died, and it's why the funeral footage detonated across social media the way it did. The tributes came fast, and they came from every corner of the sport. WBO president Gustavo Olivieri led the tributes to Colón following the news, with a statement expressing profound sorrow on behalf of the organization and extending deepest and most heartfelt condolences to his parents, family, and loved ones during this time of immeasurable loss. That statement continued, describing his life as one defined by courage, perseverance, and an extraordinary fighting spirit, and noting that his story touched the boxing community for years. The WBC's tribute carried similar weight, framing him as something closer to a symbol than just a former fighter, with a heavy heart and immense sadness enveloping the entire international boxing community. The World Boxing Council and its president, Mauricio Suleiman, mourned the passing of former boxer and icon of bravery, Prichard Colón Melendez, the organization said. Icon of bravery, not champion, not contender. The language organizations used after his death reflects how his story had shifted over 11 years. From a career cut short to something closer to a symbol of everything wrong with how the sport used to police itself. Tributes weren't limited to boxing officials. Puerto Rico's biggest cultural export weighed in with a personal letter. In a letter titled "Champion Forever," and sent to Puerto Rican newspaper El Nuevo Dia, Bad Bunny, whose real name is Benito Antonio Martinez Ocasio, said he had been a boxing fan since childhood and began following Colón's career in 2014. Around the same time, he was starting to record music in his closet. Two young Puerto Ricans, both starting out in their respective fields around the same time, one going on to global superstardom, the other's career ending violently a year later. Bad Bunny's message closed with a line that's been quoted across nearly every outlet covering the tribute. "I never stopped supporting him. I never lost faith in him. May Prichard Colón Melendez rest in peace. Much strength to his family," he wrote. That statement, from arguably the most famous Puerto Rican musician alive right now, is a big part of why this story crossed over. From a boxing headline into something trending across entertainment and music circles as well. Local Florida news coverage captured the rawest version of the family's grief, airing Prichard Colón's own words directly. He described feeling that his son was already on his way with God in that moment, leaving behind his bed, his wheelchair, his pain, and his suffering. That's the emotional core running underneath every piece of footage now circulating. A father who spent over a decade as a full-time caregiver, finally allowing himself to describe his son's death as a release from suffering rather than purely as loss. Terrell Williams, the man on the other side of that ring back in 2015, also spoke publicly, years before Colón's death, in comments that have resurfaced repeatedly since the news broke. "I pray for Prichard every day. That's never going to change," he said in a past interview, adding that he wished him nothing but peace and health, that he would never intentionally harm someone like that, and that he wished the young man really well. Those comments have taken on new weight now that Prichard is gone, circulating again under the funeral clips, as fans debate whether the sentiment holds up against the injuries Williams caused. The footage itself, the part actually driving the views right now, captured something more intimate than any official statement could. It showed the physical reality of a wheelchair sitting beside a casket, the machinery of 11 years of care now emptied of the person it was built around. That image is what's forcing so many casual scrollers to stop and actually read the caption, learn the name, and understand what they're looking at for the first time. For the people who'd followed his story since 2015, through the coma updates, the TikTok birthdays, the lawsuit headlines, the rule bearing his name, the funeral wasn't a surprise ending so much as the final chapter of something they'd been bracing for without ever wanting to admit it. Colón's death wasn't sudden in the way headlines often frame sudden losses. It was the closing of an 11-year chapter that began with 9 rounds of illegal punches, nobody stopped in time, and ended with a father posting online, one more time, that his son had finally found peace, the rule that carries his name in boxing's record books. The case still cited in conversations about ringside medical standards, and the footage now circulating across every platform are what's left of a story that started with an undefeated 23-year-old walking into a ring in Fairfax, Virginia, and never fully walking back out.